guys are going to be hearing from John Kornfeld. John Kornfeld earned his bachelor's degree in English from Princeton University, his master's in education from Sonoma State, and his PhD in education from Indiana University. He's taught elementary, middle, and high school for 16 years. And from 1995 until 2010, he was a professor at Sonoma State University, where he also served as department chair and director of undergraduate studies. From 2010 until his retirement in 2015, he served as Associate Vice President for Undergraduate Studies at SSU, and he has now returned to teaching half-time at Sonoma State in the School of Education. He's also published articles and book chapters with his wife, daughter, son's first grade teacher, and several Sonoma State colleagues, and he's currently writing a book about teaching. John.
Hi. Is this on? Good, thank you. She left out the most important word though in that bio, which is I was Associate Vice President for Undergraduate Studies until I retired in July of this last year. So those of you who are freshmen may have seen me at freshman orientation. If you're an EOP, you saw me give a presentation. If you are undeclared, you saw me give a presentation. And in both of those, I tended to talk about my family. I tended to tell some stories, and I'm going to actually do that today as well. So you learned a little bit about me. Let me just ask a couple of things about you first. And if you see me looking at my phone, it's not because I'm checking my text messages. I'm just seeing where we are. I want to make sure you get out on time. How many of you currently consider yourselves leaders? Wow, I'm impressed. How many of you are in this class because you want to be leaders on campus? Okay, a large number of you, some of you raised your hand twice. And how many of you want to be leaders in life? How many of you just don't want to be leaders at all? Wow, I'm impressed that you've already been, well, maybe you're a self-selecting group who took this class because you want to be leaders, because I'll be honest with you, I'm going to give you a couple of true disclosures here. First thing is, I never would have registered for this class because I, growing up, never saw myself as a leader. I never wanted to be a leader. All through my life, I preferred to stay in the background. My idea was just keep your head down, do your job, leave it to your bosses and elders to take care of things. Leadership, I knew, was stressful. People would ask you questions. They would expect you to be an expert. They would look up to you for help. Well, they wanted leadership, and I really wasn't prepared for that. That was for older and wiser people. You had Mo last week, right? She gives an inspiring presentation. I didn't see this one, but I've seen it before. Did she say in this presentation that leadership was fun in the presentation? I mean, and she means it. She has a lot of fun. I have to say, for me, that having people depending on me for wisdom or for support, I'd say it's more like scary. It's more like stress-inducing. Exciting, yes. Rewarding, yes. An irreplaceable experience, yes. Fun, not so sure for me. And then the years that I was in leadership positions at Sonoma State, I wouldn't say that I was having fun. I was scared. Well, not scared. That's not quite right. I was feeling the weight of responsibility. So that's one thing to keep in mind. They're all going to leave now. Forget it, right? The second thing is, I'm supposed to give a lecture on leadership, and I'm going to be honest with you, I have no idea what leadership is. And the more I try to figure it out, the less I understand, the more confused I become. So that's really what this lecture is about. For the next 45 minutes, I'm going to mostly tell you some stories that all happened to me. They're all true. Now, the people who've heard these stories before might say, well, they've changed a little bit, but they're close enough. They're all pretty true. And they all involve elements of leadership, I think. Now, my hope is that the themes and ideas that are embedded in the stories will show you that leadership can be found in unexpected places, unexpected situations. When we think of leadership, we tend to think of great or powerful people, like Martin Luther King or George Washington, or people who were leaders who were not good, Adolf Hitler. But I hope that the stories I'm going to tell will demonstrate that leadership is, in fact, everywhere. It is in a lot of people. It was in me growing up. I just needed to find it. So my goal is to, by the end of 45 minutes, I want you all to share in my confusion. I want you to, but what that means is that you'll be thinking deeply about what leadership is, and you'll come away with less of an idea than you had when you started. Confusion is a necessary step to understanding and enlightenment. It's a step towards seeing things differently from the way you saw them before. So I was asked to lecture on chapter 2. Did you all read it before you got here? Nod your heads, yes. Okay. So if you read it, you know, there's a lot in there. There's a lot of vocabulary. There's a lot of words about leadership. Things like situational contingency. I'm not sure what all of those words meant. But it's overly complicated. It's not a hugely useful chapter, but it does help you to realize, I hope, that leadership is not necessarily an agreed upon concept, that there are many theories of leadership. The chapter also does something that I'm going to do. It takes you from very simple to more complex views of leadership. So for me, the most helpful part of the chapter was the list of truths about leadership. You don't need to write it down. It's in your book. It's in the chapter. I'm going to use those truths about leadership as a touchstone in my lecture. Now, when I was reading the chapter, I was hoping that they would at least give us a useful starting point, a definition of leadership that would kind of give us a place where we could begin. Well, they spend 4 pages talking about leadership. If you notice, at the end they basically say, well, you know, what does it all mean? What does it all matter anyway? But I think it does matter. I think it helps to start out with a definition of leadership. So I was casting about trying to come up with something really simple. And a week ago, this is absolutely true, I was at a Chinese restaurant, and at the end I got a fortune. And this was the fortune that I got. Okay? Can you all read it from the back? A person you will follow, a leader is a person you will follow to a place you wouldn't go by yourself. Now, you know, obviously that's metaphorical, I would assume. But, you know, maybe not. I mean, what about this concept of following somebody in a direction? Well, I wanted to sort of play around with that, and so I teased out something that was a little bit more concrete. And that is that leadership is all about getting others to think about stuff or believe stuff or do stuff that they wouldn't necessarily do without the leader's influence. Now, I know stuff is not a very academic word. I chose it on purpose. First of all, it's nebulous. It can mean a lot of things. But also, when I was young, that's kind of the word I would have used. Stuff meant, what? Do whatever the leader wanted. And who were the leaders that I was familiar with? They were people who held authority over me. My parents, my older brother, who could beat me into submission in order to get me to do what he wanted. My teachers, those were the leaders. You know, over the years, though, I've come to see, as I said, that it's a lot more complicated than that. Okay, back to the definition, though, about thinking, believing, or doing. While pondering this definition of leadership, I came to a realization, and that is that it mirrors what James Banks said school teachers should try to do with their students, to get students to know, to care, and to act. James Banks is an educational theorist and an expert in multicultural education. This is what he said you want teachers to do in school with students. Which, of course, brings me back to schools. In my work, all roads take me back to schools. As a professor of education for many years, I studied schools as organizations, and I explored how the organizations function. So in this lecture, I'm going to use my understandings about school organization to illustrate how my conception of leadership has evolved from feeling fairly certain about it when I was a child and thought it was simple, to having no idea now, back in the classroom as a professor, when I realized how complicated it is. Those of you who are planning to be student leaders, and that's most of you here at Sonoma State, you should gain some insight here because K-12 schools like Sonoma State, like K-12 schools, are large educational institutions. So in terms of their structure and organization, colleges aren't all that different from K-12 schools. So what I talk about in terms of the organization of schools will apply to your work as a leader at Sonoma State. And for those of you who aren't planning to be leaders, I expect that you'll be able to connect with what I say with almost any relevant setting where you have to deal with an institution, an organization, a place where you work, where there are a lot of people. The titles may change, but the functions and the issues are pretty similar. So, let me start with when I was 6 years old, a first grader. As a first grader, I had a pretty simple conception of leadership in school, and that is the teacher's the leader, and the students do what the leader says. End of story. And I want to tell a short vignette that I still remember to this day, almost 60 years later, that illustrated at the time for me this view about leadership, that maybe there was more going on than I appreciated when I was 6 years old. So this took place on the playground at Overland Avenue School in Los Angeles, which is where I grew up. So let me tell you how recess worked. The way recess worked at Overland Avenue School, each class on a given day was assigned a particular area and a particular game to play. There was no variation. That is, you couldn't leave that area. So on good days, you got kickball, which was like baseball, only you pitched a ball and the batter kicked the ball. Everything else was pretty much the same. There was tetherball, and there was handball, and a few other things. And like the worst possible rotation was to caroms. Anybody know what caroms are? Wow, okay, well, caroms are like pool. You play it on a table, and the table's only about 2 feet by 2 feet. It's wood. And there are 4 pockets where the caroms go. Instead of pool balls, you have caroms that kind of look like checkers, only they have a hole in the middle, but they look like they're about the size of checkers. And the cue that you use is a little stick that's maybe this long. Okay, can you picture it? So, you know, after an hour and a half of intense reading instruction, you would, when you had caroms, you would go outside to this little area there, and you would just sort of do this. You know, that's how you got your activity. Imagine how wonderful that was for a 6-year-old boy who just wanted to get out and run around. So, on a particular fateful day, it was in the spring, I don't really know what happened. I can just tell you that I was standing in line 1 minute, holding onto my stick, waiting my turn, and the next thing I knew, I was off, just running, just crazy. And I'm brandishing the cue like a samurai sword, and I'm just, you know, I leave the imaginary boundary of the caroms, and I go through the handball court, and kids are screaming at me, and I remember getting tangled with the tetherball, and then finally, and I turn around behind me, and there are 2 other kids from my class right behind me with their... So this, I don't know how long the running around the playground lasted, but I can tell you when it ended. It ended when I went through the 6th grade kickball game. I collided with a ball that was being pitched, and the next thing I knew, I was on the ground. 1 second later, there was a 6th grader on top of me, shaking me, saying, "What do you think you're doing?" and a few other choice things. And I heard him say to somebody, "Get the yard duty," with the yard duty. So the yard duties were actually also 6th graders, but they had a sash across the front. I didn't know what it took in order to be a yard duty, but a couple of 3 6th graders come over and they grab all 3 of us by the scruff of the neck and sort of carry us over to dangling, right, over to a bench, and they sit us down and they say, "Who's your teacher?" I said, "Mrs. Royce." They said, "Oh boy, you are really in for it." So Mrs. Royce was my 1st grade teacher. She was, I'd say, at least 8 feet tall. She had like 1 eye in the middle of her forehead and was the most terrifying human being on the planet. She actually wasn't 8 feet tall, because when I was in college and thinking about becoming a teacher, I actually went back to visit the school, and I saw her, and you know, she came up to about here on me, but back then, she was 8 feet tall. And Mrs. Royce, she just looked at us and she said, "When recess is over, you are to walk into the classroom and stand in front of the class." And we did exactly what she said. We came in, and I just walked in, and I just stared at my feet. And she just reamed us out in front of the whole class. And when the reaming was over, she said one more thing. She said, "All right, do you want me to just go into the cupboard and pull out your portfolio and just rip up all the work in there?" That's when I looked up, for 2 reasons. One was to say, no, please don't. But also, it was to look at her and to think, really, even as a 6-year-old, I was thinking, what does tearing up my stuff have to do with me running around on the playground? I didn't say that. I simply said, no, never again. And she said, "All right, then sit down." Okay, end of story. I could go on, but it's too sad a story. So let me ask you a question. In light of the definition of leadership that I gave earlier, who are leaders in that story?
You.
Sorry?
You.
Me. So how was I a leader? In what way was I a leader? No, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. It's a good answer. How was I a leader? Yeah, how?
Because you led two other students to start running.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's what you were thinking. First of all, I took initiative and I took off, and then there were people following me. But it raises a question we won't have time to talk about here, but you might want to talk about in your small sections is, are you a leader? If you're not, I mean, I wasn't intending to lead, I was just running, but there were people following me. Does that make me a leader, even though my leadership was completely unconscious? Good. Who would be another leader in this story? The yard duties. Another interest, because they were the ones that lifted me up and set me down and got Mrs. Royce. And yet that raises other questions. Are you a leader if you're, basically they were just following school rules. They were doing exactly what they were told. They were telling me what to do. So it raises the question, and it's an excellent point, that they were leaders. But were they leaders or were they simply middle management, just following orders? And does that negate the leadership part? I don't know, food for thought. And there's at least one more leader, who? The teacher, Mrs. Royce. And that's what I saw at the time. That's what I mean, that's, to me, the other two, you know, myself and I said I never saw myself as a leader. Well, I never saw the yard duties as leaders either. So, you know, as mature adults, we can look back, as you're doing, and see that leadership emanates from all kinds of sources. And you might be a leader and not know about it. And Harry Potter certainly is an example of somebody who assumed the mantle of leadership and wasn't really intending to. But as a child, I had no clue that I or any other student had exercised any kind of leadership. As far as I was concerned, it all came as it is in this slide from the teacher. But I did learn an essential truth about leadership, and that's I made one of them black, and that is having a charismatic personality is not a prerequisite for leadership. You know, Mrs. Royce, whatever she may have been, was not charismatic. Okay, in fact, 16 years later, when at the tender age of 22, I began as a new teacher, I still held the view that leadership in schools came from the teacher. Another aside, can you imagine the kind of pressure that put on me as a new teacher? I expected that I, as the all-powerful teacher, needed to be the ultimate leader, and it wasn't something I was comfortable with, and it wasn't true, as I'll talk about. Now, I did have a slightly different perception, and that is I knew there was this nebulous presence up above the teacher somewhere who was an administrator. And in my first teaching job, which was teaching 4th grade at a school called Kent Place School in New Jersey, I knew about the administrator because he was the headmaster, and it was a private school, and he had gone to Princeton. And I got the job because I had gone to Princeton. That was my only qualification. I knew nothing about how to teach. But I didn't know that I knew nothing. Not until back to school night. So I'll tell you a little bit about back to school night, story number 2. These kids were from a high socioeconomic group. They had very involved parents. They had been taught from the time they were 1-year-old how to behave, what they needed to do in school. And so the kids were fine. And I had been handed textbooks in math and social studies and English and reading and everything else. And I just followed the textbook. Not good teaching, but at the time I felt like I was doing just fine. And so back to school night would be a piece of cake. That's at the beginning of the semester, when it's a dog and pony show. The teacher stands up and kind of goes through the curriculum, and then at the end the parents file out and go for milk and cookies somewhere. So that's what I did. I had all the books prepared, back to school night. I had 25 students, there were 50 parents there, 100 eyes looking at me, and I just started going through the curriculum. And I was just getting to reading. I had done math, and then I was doing reading, and I heard from the back of the room, "Excuse me, Mr. Kornfeld." I turned around to see why my dad was behind me, because Mr. Kornfeld, the only Mr. Kornfeld I knew was my father. I was 22, right? Hadn't heard an adult call me that ever, but she said it with dripping sarcasm. "No, Mr. Kornfeld, may I ask you a question? Could you tell me how many sight words the average 4th grader should know?" Sight words. I wouldn't have known the sight word if it had smacked me on the nose. I had no idea what she was talking about. And I'm standing in front of 50 parents, and I have no idea what she's talking about. So in my mind, I'm sort of trolling for an answer, and after what seemed like about an hour, it was probably more like 30 seconds, I said, well, you know, I really don't think you should quantify things like that when it comes to the whole child. It's really much better to take each child individually. I looked at their faces. I had fooled nobody. They knew that I didn't know what I was talking about. Before I could even say something else, another hand went up. Mr. Kornfeld, why are you telling our children lies? That was a shock. I had even less idea what she was talking about. I said, what? What do you mean? She said, you told my daughter, Tracy, that if you want to lose weight, just stand on top of a mountain. I had nothing to say. I will tell you parenthetically that the next day I went to Tracy and I said to her, what was that about standing on top of a mountain? She said, don't you remember when we read the story about hiking, you said that when you go to the top of the mountain, you get thinner. I said, oh no, what I had said is the air gets thinner. But that wasn't going to help me at back to school night. There I was. And that was just the beginning. It wasn't an introduction to me or me to them. It was a hazing. I would still be there to this day, probably, if old Agatha Heidelberg, the ancient teacher next door, by the way, all these names are not real. If Agatha Heidelberg had not come, but they're similar, actually, to the names. She had a German name, and I like that name. Came into the classroom, and as the parents are asking me more questions, she says, oh, time's up, sorry parents, milk and cookies downstairs, and everybody files out. Agatha filed out as well. Well, I mean, I really didn't even want to come back the next day, ever, but I did. And when I got to school, on my desk there was a Hershey bar with a note underneath it which said something like, the first 100 years are the hardest, signed Agatha Heidelberg. So I went into her classroom before school and I wanted to thank her for it. And she said, heard you had a hard time with the parents last night. She knew everything that had gone on, every question. She said, I just want you to know, Mrs. Smith, the first question you got, you know, she applied for the job that you got. That was just sour grapes, she said. So that felt good. A little bit good, but it still didn't really, what it did is it gave me confidence in Mrs. Heidelberg that she'd be there to support me. Now, Mrs. Heidelberg, as I said, she was old, she was really old. She was probably about 5 years younger than me now, but she seemed ancient, and it could work both ways. And I'll give you an example. So I was struggling. Things got a little harder as I was realizing that kids were not learning anything in my class, particularly in math. I would give them the algorithm. They'd have 50 problems. They would do all of them wrong. And I would have lines of students in front of me having questions in class. And I had this brilliant idea. What if I have them work in small groups and I mix them up so that some kids who are stronger and some kids who are weaker, and they can help each other and I can get to everybody that way? What a brilliant idea, right? So I did that. I put them all in groups and they got working and it was wonderful. And I had time to go around and sort of check things with each group, but it was happening. The room was humming. Very good kind of activity. And I'm bending over a desk, working with a group of students, and suddenly there's a shadow in the doorway. It's Mrs. Heidelberg. She stands up there and she screams at the top of her voice, what is going on in this classroom? What do you think this is, a poker game? Every one of you get back into your seats, get your seats in rows. At which point I stood up. And she said, oh, Mr. Kornfeld, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize that you were in the room. She knew I was in the room. This was Mrs. Heidelberg telling me that I better get my house in order fast. And getting my house in order means no noise, no groups, do things the right way, do things early. So I learned that, as you can see, I learned in a very short time that parents have some influence in leadership over the teacher, and I also learned that other teachers can have some influence over the teachers. Now, I don't want to make it all sound negative, because a few days later, Sarah Gordon came into my classroom. She was a different teacher, and she came in and said, I hear you've been having some problems with Agatha. It's like everybody knew what was going on in the school but me. And I said, well, yeah. She said, I know. She doesn't want you to work in groups. She said, look, I work in groups. This is what you do. Just stay under the radar. She said, close the door to your classroom and tell your students to use their 6-inch voices. That's all. 6-inch voices. And you know what? It worked. As long as I stayed under the radar, as long as I found ways to do things that the people in power, Agatha, didn't know about, I was golden. I was in good shape. I learned a lot. And I continued to get help from Sarah Gordon. So, you know, the influence of other teachers could be both positive and negative. Now, over those first couple of years, of course, I encountered problems that any new teacher would encounter. Student misbehavior, students refusing to do their work, getting mad and stomping out, talking when they're not supposed to talk, all of the usual stuff. So what I began to see also was it's not just me leading the students. The students could do a lot of leadership themselves. It goes both ways. So what did I learn at Kent Place School then? Back to the 6 truths about leadership. What I learned is that leadership occurs at all levels. It doesn't just happen top down. It goes every which way. And it seemed to me at that point that it was all heading in my direction. Okay, I need to stop here because you might be thinking, and if you are, you're right. You might be thinking, wait a minute, is he talking about leadership? Or is he talking about power? It's sort of moved away from leadership and I'm really talking about power. Clearly, when I was a new teacher, I thought the teachers held all the power, and I gradually came to see that it was a shared thing. So, power, leadership, how much of a confusion is it? Well, how many of you have had Dean Leader for Soc 201? So, just a few of you. Well, if you get a chance, if she ever teaches it again, you should take it. I heard a lecture of hers a couple of years ago, and she defined power this way: the ability to get people to do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do. Well, it's almost like that fortune cookie again. And then look at my leadership definition. They're almost the same. So what's the relationship between leadership and power? Well, power, if you go back to chapter 2, is mentioned several times. And the idea is that you need to be empowered in order to be a leader. You can't really have one without the other. But where does power come from? Well, power can be divided into 2 categories: positional power and personal power. So positional power goes with a title, it goes with a position. It's not you, it's external to you, but it comes with privileges, and those privileges leave you as soon as you leave the position. I'll use myself as an example. As Associate Vice President for Undergraduate Studies, I could increase the number of seats in GE classes. I could get more GE classes to be offered. I could put, if a need arose, I could literally put a student in that class. They could come to me, I could see that it needed to happen, and I would do it. Well, you know, on July 3rd, when I retired, that power disappeared. And because it goes with the position, I can't do that anymore. Personal power is different. That's internal. That's what you have and what you always have. And it's something that you feel, it's something that you exert, it's something that can sometimes trump positional power. So if you consider the dynamics at Kent Place School, so I was in the same position as Agatha Heidelberg, and yet she was a teacher, I was a teacher. She wielded so much more personal power than I did. She had such great personal power that she, in fact, far overshadowed anyone in the administration. That's one reason why I didn't really understand the role of an administration, because she told them what to do. She told them what we were going to do. And she ran the school, and she wielded that power in order to maintain her leadership and power. Now, Sarah, on the other hand, the other teacher, she also had a lot of personal power, but she used it to empower me to take charge of my own classroom. So it's not just having the power, it's how you choose to use it. So power isn't necessarily top-down. You have these intersecting realms of power that depend a lot on the personalities of the players. That's why it's so important that you find the power in you as you take on leadership roles. So consider position power and personal power and their connection to leadership when I tell the next, and I think it'll be the final short story from my teaching. So after 5 years of teaching at Kent Place School, I moved back to Sonoma County, and I had a much more mature view about leadership. Mature but complicated. Let me tell you about my first day at Springdale School. Springdale School, also not a real name, was a school that I got the job a week or less before school started. I didn't meet any of the teachers. I really didn't get a sense of how the school was run. I just was able to get my classroom together. And on the first day of school, I showed up half an hour before school, but none of the teachers were in their classrooms. They were all out, hanging out actually in the morning sun, the beautiful September California morning. And so I joined them. They're all sitting on the benches, and the kids are just kind of milling around. It's funny if you compare that to Overland Avenue School, right? The culture at Overland Avenue was everybody in their place. At Springdale, the kids were just milling about. I said, what's going on? They said, just wait. When Mr. Jones comes, you'll know. Mr. Jones was the principal. He was the one who had hired him. And so Mr. Jones shows up. He looks like Santa Claus. He's about in the mid-60s, and he's got a giant sack on his back. But it's not presents. It's balls and athletic equipment. The kids all crowd around him and they're just shouting, Mr. Jones, get us the ball. And so, a fourth grader, he says, Billy, run long. And Mr. Jones, he's a lefty. He throws a perfect 40-yard pass to Billy, who runs off, and Mr. Jones says, okay, form up teams. And within 2 minutes, they formed up teams, and they're playing a flag football game. 8th grade girls have already formed up teams, and they're shouting for basketball. He shoots a perfect swish from at least 40 feet away. And the girls get the ball, and they're playing. And within 10 minutes, all the kids are playing, all in these sort of team games with each other. Really an amazing sight to see. So I'm sitting with the teachers, just kind of hanging out. And he stays on the playground. He clearly loves being with those kids, and they love him. And at a certain point, I say, well, aren't we going to go in? And I said, well, what time does school start? They said, oh, I don't know, about 9. I said, about 9? What do you mean? They said, about 9. I said, well, what time does the bell ring? They said, oh, there are no bells. Okay, so I just waited. It was like waiting for Godot. So finally, I don't know, 9:20, who knows what time it was, Mr. Jones calls all the balls in, and the kids all throw the balls to him, and they go off into their classrooms. You see, Mr. Jones loved nothing more than hanging out on the playground with the kids, leading them in games. In fact, I don't know what he did as a principal, because he coached a lot of the teams, including football. He coached the 8th grade flag football team, 6-man football. It's a really fast game. Everybody's eligible. And so I was the 8th grade homeroom teacher. It was a kindergarten through 8th country school. So I had the 8th graders for homeroom. And the kids said, hey, you should come to a game. It's a really big part of our lives here. So I did. I went to the first game. And they did pretty well, but they didn't win. There were a few flaws in their execution, particularly around special teams, keeping the ball in. So next day in the homeroom, after the first game, I said, hey, 8th grade boys, you want to hang with me at lunch? Maybe we could talk a little football. Now, I kind of thought about what to do, but I had learned in my previous school, just if you want to do something, you just do it, under the radar. So I did. I met with them at lunch and showed them what I showed them, and they came in a couple more times and we drew out some plays. And I went to the next football game and they won. I went down to the field to congratulate them afterwards, and a few of them came over and said, hey, thanks a lot. We won thanks to you. And I felt really good. And I sort of continued to do that with them when they were in football and even when they were in basketball. Nobody said anything, so it's much like Kent Place School. I was managing to show some leadership and do some really good things with the kids by staying in the wire. Fast forward to later on in the year, one of the kids in my class one day shows up with a brand new pair of sneakers. And this was a highly impoverished school. That kid didn't have 2 dimes to put together, and he had these at the time, probably $100 sneakers. And I said, wow, where did you get them? He said, Mr. Jones gave them to me. And sure enough, 3 or 4 other kids come in with sneakers. It turns out Mr. Jones had a connection with some representative for, I don't remember if it was Adidas or Puma, which was big. Do they still exist, Pumas? Yeah, okay, I don't know. I wear old man sneakers, and they said New Balance, right? So, anyway, it turns out this guy has got 1 million sneakers that are like last year's model, still incredible sneakers. And after about 2 weeks, every kid in the school had a new pair of sneakers. And then teachers started getting them. My best friend Jane at that school, who has often actually taught this leadership course, she would corroborate this story if she were here. She had a pair, and then another teacher had a pair. And I just was waiting for the day I was going to get my sneakers. And so one day in the teacher's room, I look around and every single teacher, even old Mrs. Z, who was 80 years old and a chain smoker and sort of shuffled around, she had a new pair of sneakers. And so I kind of announced to the place at large, when do you think, I wonder when Mr. Jones is going to give me a pair of sneakers. And Jane saunters over to me and puts her arm around me and says, John, you will never get a pair of sneakers from Mr. Jones. Oh, isn't that terrible? All these sad stories. But it was, you know why? You know why? Everything with Mr. Jones was about teamwork. He taught the kids sports. He did everything around teams. If I had more time, I would be able to tell how these kids learned to work together as teams. There's sayings on the gym about teamwork. And what was I doing? I was going under the radar. It wasn't under his radar. He knew what was going on. But he chose not to say anything. The way he did it was he just cut me out. Never dealt with me, never had anything to do with me. I was not part of his team. Once I realized that, it was a really important revelation. And it would have helped me understand my first back-to-school night. Yes, another back-to-school night. I didn't get what was going on then, but after years of reflection, I understand it. A dreaded back-to-school night. My first back-to-school night at Springdale School. The parents come in, very different socioeconomic group from that first one I told you about, but equally strong in terms of numbers. They were all there to see the teacher. And I'm ready with my spiel, but before I can even get one word out, one of the parents doesn't even raise her hand, she just says, how can I get my son to do his homework more? I send him to his room, and he doesn't do any work. Is this a trick question? I'm wondering. What now? But before I can even answer, another parent on another side of the room says, hey, does he have a television in his room? She said, yeah. She said, well, I'd say get that TV out of his room. Maybe he would do his homework. And then another parent says, well, my kid doesn't have a TV in his room, but he just complains about, he just wants to eat. I just want him to do his homework, and he says, I can't, I'm hungry. And another parent says, well, give him some food when he gets home, he's hungry. And you see what's going on? There is a conversation going on among the parents. I'm not excluded, actually. I started when I realized what was going on. I also came up with suggestions and ideas. It was a team effort as we were discussing the needs of their children. It was very different from what I had seen at Kent Place School. Teamwork was evident, really evident. If I had only picked up on that, I would have done much better with Mr. Jones. So, and I could go on. The best question I got, I wish I had time to talk about this one, was from somebody known as Slow Ted. He really was about 6'8". He stood up and said, is my son learning more than you are teaching him? And sat down. I thought, another trick question. But then I thought, no, actually, that's right. I shouldn't just be spoon-feeding it to him. What I'm teaching him should be a springboard to bigger and better things. Or he should be connected, all of these thoughts going through my mind. And all I was able to say was, yeah, that he really should. But that was actually a revelation for me that really fueled me for the next 10 years, thinking about how to make that happen. But that's a whole other story. I need to get back to what this sort of showed me. Well, obviously, first of all, it's that everything moves in every which direction. There is, at Springdale School, leadership and power just was all over the place. Now, back to the truths about leadership. Let's go to you need to distinguish between leadership and management. Well, that's actually true. Mr. Jones was a great leader. You know, I'm still Facebook friends with a lot of my students from way back then. I mean, they're practically as old as me now. And one of them is a professor. One of them is a professor at a college back east, North Carolina. And you know, at his doctoral ceremony, he invited Mr. Jones to come. Because Mr. Jones taught him so much about what it took to really function in society, to be a success. And I could go on and on about the stories about Mr. Jones. But he was a terrible man. He spent all of his time out on the playing field when there was all this work that needed to happen. You know, management is about making sure everything goes smoothly. So he was a great leader, but a terrible manager. On the other hand, and I can tell you that as a manager in my previous position, there's so much managing that has to happen. You have to figure out a way to separate it out so that you actually can think about what are the ways that I can lead. Otherwise, management takes over. So that's one. And the other truth is that there is not one identifiable way to lead an organization. If you consider, well, before I get to that, let's look at this for a second. I want you to compare for a moment my 6-year-old versus 60-year-old, 60-plus-year-old understanding. And that is, you can see that it went from very simple to very complex. But the structure is actually not all that different. It's still, any school has the same organizational structure if you were to look at it on a chart. But it's that key about leadership and that there is no one way to lead an organization. Consider Kent Place School versus Springdale School. At Kent Place School, leadership was completely top-down. It actually looked a lot like this. And so the only way to be successful for me as a teacher was to fly under the radar. Whereas at Springdale School, staying under the radar was destructive to my status as a teacher, and it was destructive to the organization. What I was doing was really counteractive. I was modeling bad leadership by undermining the most popular leader, and I was doing the same things that I had done at Kent Place School. So the generic structure really doesn't mean anything until you actually apply what's going on in the particular culture that you're in. So that kind of leads me to what many of you will be doing next year as student leaders. What do you do if you're new to an organization? FYE is different from the humanities learning communities. I'm just thinking of peer mentors. Is different from ACE. Each one of them has its own culture, its own faculty, its own structures. So what do you do? Well, first of all, you do nothing. You just do what you're told, right? For a while. You ask questions, you watch, you take no sides, you don't get involved in the politics, you learn how things work. One administrator here at Sonoma State called it kicking the tires. You just kind of kick the tires to understand really what's going on. And then, eventually, as you begin to understand what the culture is, you begin to try things out that will fit within the existing culture of the organization. So I want to return in the last 5 minutes to what I said at the beginning of the lecture. And that is, I really don't understand exactly what leadership is. But every day I really think I understand it better. And the charts that you've seen is sort of an illustration. But I haven't gotten, also, there are two more truths about leadership that I haven't touched on, and I want to touch on them now. So, first of all, the idea that leaders are born and not made. That's actually why I told you, one of the reasons why I told you all these stories, and why I told you that I never saw myself as a leader, when obviously, in the end, I found myself being a leader. So consider that trajectory. So at the beginning, I just was trying to get the job done, right? At Kent Place School, fly under the radar. But what happened was, as I became a more accomplished teacher, people started asking me for more, started asking me questions. The principal of the school where I taught, at Springdale School, that was after Mr. Jones retired. Without asking me, she signed me up to lead a teacher workshop. She said, you're an expert in the teaching of history, and you should share your knowledge with others. It's not something I ever would have done. It was something that caused me a lot of stress and worry, but it sort of moved me to a new level in terms of my own leadership. I came to Sonoma State. I was a professor for a while, and my department chair said, you really should teach in FYE, the freshman year experience. It wasn't something I had intended to do, but I did. And then my colleagues in FYE asked me to be the coordinator of FYE. And then somebody in the provost's office suggested that I start working in the provost's office. So what I'm saying is that I found myself taking on more and more responsibility, really without wanting to or meaning to, but it really was kind of a natural progression. And again, I mentioned Harry Potter a little earlier, but I don't want to compare myself to Harry. Obviously, he's in a class by himself. I could never do what he did. But how many of you have read the Harry Potter series? And how many of you have seen the movies? I don't know if this is in the movies, but it's definitely in the book. Towards the end, when Harry is at King's Cross Station, in his mind, more or less, and she's having this final incredible conversation with Dumbledore, and Harry said, I never wanted to be a leader, I just wanted to live my life. And Dumbledore says, it's a curious thing, Harry, but perhaps those who are best suited to power are those who have never sought it. Those who, like you, have leadership thrust upon them and take up the mantle because they must, and find to their own surprise that they wear it well. It seems as though if you really desperately want to be a leader, desperation to be a leader is less important than really moving up and having people respect you as you move up. So you learn the organization, you learn how things work, and then you are able to take on that mantle of leadership because you will be respected. Lastly, there's the truth that leadership is teachable. Well, that's really what University 238 is all about. Clearly, you can't learn to be a leader simply by studying it, obviously, but by studying it and applying it to real-life situations, all of us involved in this course are convinced that it's possible. But as I've tried to show you today, it's a lifelong journey. You'll have to let us know at the end of the semester, or maybe beyond, if you think that we were right. So thank you very much. Good luck in your leadership.